this afternoon. John Huerta and Baltasar Baca. They are names that I go back with more than any of the three of us want to remember. But the two of them, more so than I, played a very important role in the founding of this organization. And I have to say that as I look around and I see these young faces, this is a dream come true, because you all are so responsible and you all have all kinds of mechanisms to reach decisions. In my neighborhood, the way we did is, John, ¿qué tú piensas? Balti, are you on board? Yeah. And that was the way the decisions were made. Yeah. So kudos to the organization and kudos to the institutionalization of the organization. Before we get into it very long, I have to say that I want to pay tribute to Justice Weimer for two things. For reminding me how to say New Orleans. No. One of my first jobs was with Moon Landrew, who was mayor of this city many, many moons ago. And the second one is for reminding us about service and why it is we do what we do every single day. And if we forget that, we're lost. So to go back to our beginnings, John, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the organization. And of course, I have to preface this by saying that there were lawyers all over the United States, but the Hispanic lawyers were in California. And that's where John was. That's where John met history.
Well, I'd like to start out by giving some background about my uprising in Southern California. I remember when I was about 4 or 5, my dad took me to work with him, and he worked for the auctioneers. And I saw him up there holding up these tables and other things with an African-American man for people to bid on. And I was so proud of him because he was up there in front of everybody. And I thought, wow, how can you beat that? And later on, he had 4 kids in Catholic school. And he was paying tuition for all these 4 kids. And he read in the newspaper that the best school district was only about 5 miles from our house. And it was a public school. And it was rated best in the state. He read that in the Los Angeles Times. And so he went over to try and rent a house in that neighborhood. And he went to several places. And all of them said, we don't rent to, I won't even use the terminology here, but it was extremely derogatory. And it was the first time I ever saw him cry. And so later on, I was fortunate. I went to a Catholic grammar school and high school, and then I went to Cal State LA. I was accepted at UCLA, but I decided to go to Cal State LA because it was closer and I hated driving in traffic. So at Cal State LA, I held various offices. I ended up being student body president my senior year. And I remember we were still living on 1345 West 106th Street. And my next door neighbor delivered or picked up trash in the Watts area, which was very low income African-American community. And Scotty was his name. And when the rebellion took place by African-Americans in this area because of their poverty and discrimination, somebody shot a rifle at him. They missed him, but he had all kinds of glass shrapnel. for me, I was driving my car and I stopped at an intersection and a young man was crossing and he had a sawed-off shotgun with him. And he pointed at me and I smiled at him and gave him a thumbs up. And he kept on walking. So that was a close call. So I don't want you to think I had an easy life in my early childhood, but I learned to work hard. I went to Hastings my first year. I had a very low 13th percentile from the bottom for the law school aptitude test. And so I went to Hastings. I ended up number 9 out of 450 students there. And so I transferred to Berkeley, Bolt Hall. And at Berkeley, my first semester there, I made law review. I was ranked 10 in my class out of 150 students. And I thought, oh, these law firms are coming to interview. And one was from New York City. And I thought, I don't really want to work for a New York law firm, but I wouldn't mind getting flown out to New York City and being wined and dined and that sort of thing. So I had the interview and they asked me 2 questions. Now, remember, I had already written several law review articles. They didn't ask me any questions about that. They asked me 2 questions. One, was I Mexican American? Number 2, did I speak Spanish? That was it. Now, for the women in the audience, the lady who was number 2 in the entire student law school, her 3rd year, she was ranked number 2. They said, oh, I'm sorry, we don't hire women because they're too emotional. It's unbelievable in this day and age that would happen. So this is 1968 when I graduated. And I got to meet Cruz Reynoso very early because he was a 1958 grad and he came to the annual class reunion. So when I was at Berkeley in 67, I met him for the first time and we started chatting and I asked him what he was doing. So I got to know him, saw him again in 68, and a number of things like that. So I'll just stop at this point right now and then we can get into some more issues.
Well, and as we will see, Cruz, Reynoso, and Mario Obledo were the axis of this organization. They have left us an incredible legacy, and I still like candles to them. Balti knew them as well.
Yes.
Balti, can you tell us some of the interactions, some of your early interactions? You were a law student.
Yes.
And with Mario and Cruz and others.
Yes. Well, I was in 1971, I was a 2nd-year law student at the University of Denver Law School. And I went to, we went to LA, a group of Chicano lawyers, as we were called then, went to LA for the National Convention of La Raza Law Students Association. The first convention was held in Berkeley, and
You all were a bunch of liberals.
Yeah, and I was the only guy from non-California that was going to run against 2 Californians for president of La Raza Law Students Association. And the only reason I won, I suspect, is because California split its vote as usual between the North and the South. I ran against a guy from Stanford and I ran against a guy from UCLA. Bettis was the guy from Stanford and Gomez was from UCLA. And they split the vote and I got the votes from Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and New Mexico, plus the East Coast, which at the East Coast was referred to as actually Harvard, Yale, and Georgetown. Those were the 3 representatives of that area. So I got elected there at that convention. And then next thing I knew, Mario and Cruz were at the convention, of course, because they're the ones that funded the law student convention of us law students at the time might have, and I'm exaggerating, probably a little bit, but not by much, maybe 150, maybe in the whole country that were actually there. And so after I won, Cruz and Mario came up to me and told me what I was going to do, and I did it. So first of all, I ended up being on the MALDEF board, the Mexican American Legal Defense Board, and then I ended up being on the Council on Legal Education Opportunity Board and Reginald Heber-Smith and Legal Services as the student representative of La Raza Law Students Association in behalf of La Raza Lawyers Association. And I said to those guys, Mario and Cruz, what do I do? And they just said, follow our lead. And the reason they wanted us in student representation and the reason we wanted to be La Raza Law Students and Lawyers is we wanted representations on the board. And Cruz, Justice Reynoso would say, look, we started from the top up and worked our way down. We had a national organization and no infrastructure in relationship to local. But we worked on the local structure, and that's another story. That's the genesis of when I was involved. And Miguel Mendez was the lawyer that John knows, of course, that incorporated La Raza Lawyers Association. And Mario Bledo, Cruz Reynoso, and Luis Garcia, Superior Court judge in San Francisco, were the three incorporators of La Raza Lawyers Association.
So La Raza Lawyers Association, John, was the original name.
Right. The first, it evolves through many different organizations' names over time. Mm-hmm. Before that, actually. Miguel Mendez was a very funny guy. When he drafted the bylaws, he used feminine terminology throughout, even though there are only two Latina lawyers that I knew of at that time, Vilma Martinez and Graciela Olivares, in California. That's a little story there about him.
And Vilma Vilma Martinez Singer and Graciela Olivares were on the MALDEF board. And we went, after getting elected in Los Angeles, my first stint was where I went to Mexico City for the MALDEF board meeting. And Vilma and Graciela told me that I had to run against a guy named Bob Gonzalez, who was a superior a representative in San Francisco, because he was a real sexist. And they wanted me to run against him because they were, I guess, verbally abused by him. I said, why don't you two run and I'll support you? And they said, no, in fairness, they didn't have time because they were doing a lot of other things. And so they let me, so I was a second-year law student, and I got elected vice president of the MALDEF board. And I was like a deer in headlights. What the hell do I do now? You know, because it's a lot of work, and this is all volunteer work, of course.
Those were the early years, and the early years had a lot to do with a lot of the other community organizations going on at the same time. Raúl Izaguirre, National Council of La Raza, and other organizations were the ones who were really out there talking about the Hispanic community and not only the power of our vote, but our economic power. How did those interactions affect the early HNBA structure?
Before we get to that, there's a point I want to make about Cruz. Cruz Reynoso was born in El Centro, California, and he went to the Westminster School District. And I understand that's on the calendar here to talk about Mendez versus Westminster, because it was a case that was followed in Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. And when we meet people like Cruz, to realize they were segregated from other folks. You can see the strength of this man's character. He later went on to be on the Supreme Court of California. Had the pleasure of working with him when I joined California Rural Legal Assistance. He was my boss there. This is before he became a member of the Supreme Court. And just a wonderful, loving guy. He passed away just probably within a year ago.
In May.
What was your question?
How did the organizations like California Rural Organization and the National Council of La Raza affect how the early La Raza Lawyers Association worked? And was it synchronized? What was the relationship, if any?
Well, there were key people that provided the leadership, and their names have been mentioned already. Cruz, I think, was one of the most important, but Vilma Martinez was a very strong leader as well.
Vilma was at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund at the
Before,
time.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, Mario Bledo and let's see who else.
Luis Garcia.
Oh, yeah.
Judge Luis Garcia. Mari, to your point, I think NCLR, National Council of La Raza, LULAC, League of United Latin American Citizens, and PERLDEF, and the Cuban Legal Defense Fund. Basically, there was no orchestration, but we were all saying the same thing in the sense of wanting representation. And we wanted representation both in terms of the boardrooms, in the schoolrooms, and throughout society to becoming more integrated. It was very radical at the time. And people thought that it was, and I use the phrase a lot of times with my African-American friends, and we would say, we would have to remind people that the world's not black and white. It's also brown and red and green. And a lot of the Hispanic organizations, whether it was from the Puerto Rican or Cuban or Mexican-American sectors and the Central and South American sectors, were always reminding that we also deserved a seat on the table. And there's a famous case, Hernandez versus Texas, that went to the U.S. Supreme Court that says, no, you're not considered Anglo-Saxon, because it was argued that Hispanics were white and therefore not being discriminated against. But in the Supreme Court case of Hernandez versus Texas, it says we're an identifiable ethnic group. And we had to remind people of this. And it seemed like we were talking to deaf ears a lot of times, because we were talking to deaf ears because a lot of people would either turn their backs or just gloss over us, and it was a persistence of community organizations that were at the thrust of the Hispanic bar and La Raza law students. And we should never forget these community organizations were very helpful at the very beginning when we were just trying to get our sea legs, so to speak.
At the root, and I think the point we all want to make is that in its very origin, at its core, HNBA was a community-based organization. That's how we started, and that's the truth. It has evolved into something wonderful, and it would have been something that we all dreamed about in those days. But at its root, it was purely community. And if there had not been that synchronicity between the other organizations and HNBA, none of us would have moved forward. I remember one of the first anecdotes that I had in New York, because I was a Puerto Rican from Puerto Rico. I was a Puerto Rican, not a New Yorican. I became a Philorican because I studied in Philadelphia. But as my evolution took place, it became clear that the guardian angels were being arrested. And we got a call at Temple, where I was in law school then, saying, can you represent the guardian angels? 5 of us got on a train to New York. We were law students. We had no idea of what we were doing. But had it not been because of all the noise that was being made by all the organizations, we would not have been in the map. And let's talk a little bit Balti, about conventions, what they look like. John, you remember as well,
Yeah.
what they look like, who attended, what were the programs like, and what were our goals. Balti?
Okay, one of the ones that comes to mind right after I was elected in Los Angeles and after sitting in several different boards was one in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we were at I think it was a Hilton hotel, and it just so happened that there were legal services was there having a convention. Mario came in as a speaker, and so did Cruz come in as a speaker. So we, the three of us, got around and looked around for Hispanics in the convention, and we got. I think I might be exaggerating a little bit, but I think it was really close to 20 Hispanic lawyers, and we're calling this a national convention, La Raza Lawyers Association, and we were there, and there were maybe 20 of us, and we all had to pitch in to pay for the room so that they would serve us lunch, and and then we designated Mario as the first speaker, and then Cruz was the keynote speaker. And literally, there were just literally 20 of us. That was one convention. There was another convention in Denver where we held it at a bar. And at that bar, there was only like 15 of us, and we all had to buy our own drinks. And we had no agenda. We would just drink and talk about, some of the things that were going on in Denver and Colorado or in California. There were maybe 3 or 4 California lawyers there. It wasn't until Mari Carmen Aponte in San Antonio, Texas, in a parking lot said, "This is not acceptable. We can do better than this." And she's the one that raised it into the hotel. She's the one that actually signed on the dotted line at the Capitol Hilton in Washington, D.C., putting her own collateral, because I wouldn't have enough collateral to put up, but she put up her own collateral so that convention could be held. And Sandra Day O'Connor was one of the speakers at that convention.
That's right. The first time.
Yes.
I wanted to comment on the evolution of the name of the organization, because La Raza Lawyers wasn't acceptable to Filipinos, Cubanos, Tejanos, Puerto Ricanos, all kinds of folks. They thought La Raza referred to Chicanos and Canas. And so that's how we came up with the name, the federal name. We came up with Hispanic National Bar Association. And the other thing was we couldn't get federal funding unless we were a national organization. And that was extremely important, because different groups that we could influence, we wanted to be on their board. Blanking on some of the names right now, but one was Reginald Heber Smith Fellowship Program, Council on Legal Education Opportunities. There's a third one, can't remember it. But anyway, that's one reason why we became national organization. Yeah, right. I mentioned that.
Well, the reason why a Puerto Rican would be interested in joining the Hispanic National Bar, and by the time I got to know it, it was already HNBA, was because I had a partner who was a Mexican-American from Laredo, Texas, Eduardo Peña. And Ed Peña was a wonderful rebel rouser who taught me how to walk picket lines, and who taught me that every time there was a case in the Supreme Court, we needed to be there demonstrating. And he really had an incredible commitment. And he was the one who suggested that we attend this convention in San Antonio in that parking lot. And I remember talking to him and to other supporters. At that time, there were, I don't know, 40 of us, 45. And it was a question of who was there at the time the votes were taken and who would raise their hand. And so, hey, I went out and I campaigned, and all my people went out and we campaigned. And all of a sudden, everybody's saying, a Puerto Rican woman? But I got elected.
Yeah.
And the saving grace that I had, and this is, I mean, the coincidence, sometimes the universe just conspires to get it right for you. I was just selling a house in Philadelphia that gave me some cash, and that was the cash that I used to put down all the front money of the Capitol Hilton, because they would not even, we had to have the money up front.
Because we didn't have any history in relationship to
any
hotels
hotel
or anything, any
in
program.
our name.
Yes.
And the Hiltons were looking, and the Marriotts were looking, and who? Is it National Council of La Raza? No. Fortunately, I did get everything back, and I
Yes.
could then buy a house, which is the house I'm living in
Yes.
now. But it was because of that convention, and because Sandra Day O'Connor, because of Ricardo Urbina and Mario and Cruz, who lobbied her to attend the convention, came. I look up, it was a breakfast.
Yeah.
It was a breakfast meeting.
Yes.
It was like at 7:30 in the morning, because that's what she wanted. I come into the meeting, there's like 300 people there, 50 Hispanics, but 300 people there. 300 people there.
Yes.
And then I knew we had arrived. And of course, Mario and Cruz and all the founders were like, you got 300 people to a breakfast. It was something. In any way, that was a turning point that I am extremely proud of. And I have to say, it was the women.
No.
Dolores, I'm coming for you.
I would like to go back to the very early period, why California Rural Legal Assistance was created. And it was because of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. So we have them to thank, because that's our roots.
Yeah.
It was very forceful forces in those early times. So once we got over and we became established and we could go to Los Angeles the next year
That's
and get credit at the hotel, that's when we started getting the numbers.
Yes, that's true.
That's
true.
we must have had about almost 200 people enrolled beforehand. You have no idea of what a triumph this was. Because of course, every time we were looking for sponsorships, and Balti went with me sometimes, we would talk about the 10,000 Hispanic lawyers.
We didn't
We
have
just
any.
have to identify them.
We didn't have any data, but that was our best instincts.
I hear you talk about data and gathering data, and I salute you, because it was all data. And the security with which we all approached those numbers, nobody could tell me I was wrong.
That's true. That's true.
I had the truth by the tail.
Yes, that's true. That's what the other thing that's interesting about this is in terms of you've heard the story of the Hispanic bar evolving to the Hispanic bar from La Raza Lawyers Association. You know, what's interesting is to keep this in mind, and some people out there might do a little bit of research on this. The word Hispanic was actually adopted by the Civil Service Commission of the federal government. And it became an official term, Hispanic, in terms of an identifiable ethnic group, and then which is now evolved to the Office of Personnel Management. But the guy that promoted the term Hispanic, or not just Hispanic bar, but just the generic term of Hispanic now, is a guy by the name of Carlos Rodriguez that worked as a GS-15 at then what was called the Civil Service Commission. And he did research and came up with the idea of putting the concept of Spanish and Indian together and coming up with the concept of Hispanic. And that's the origins, to the best of my knowledge. And the word Hispanic for the Bar Association, I think Mari has a handle on that and has a good perspective of it evolving out of the parking lot in San Antonio, Texas. I think that's exactly where it evolved. But what was amazing was the arguments that we used to have hours on end. And I know John sat through some of these, of whether we were going to be La Raza, whether we were Spanish, whether we were Mexican, whether we were Puerto Rican or Cuban. And the concept of Hispanic being generic really was a positive force.
I hated the name Hispanic because it was a creation of the federal government.
Yes, yes. And that's true, there was. But we used to argue about this stuff for a long. I never did. Oh, and then the other one that I just remembered was we might have been called Salsa, Spanish American Lawyers Association. That was also floated around for salsa, but that didn't catch legs.
I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions, and please start thinking about them. But before they do, why don't we wrap up this segment by talking about what we see as some of the challenges ahead for all of you as you carry the torch forward, and what do we see as some of the things that we feel the organization as it moves forward should do. Where should it expand? Where should it go? What should it serve?
Before we launch into that, one of the things that I want to say is because we can speak with a national voice and lobby with a national voice, we can help other Latinos and Latinas. And one good example is Vilma Martinez was the ambassador to Argentina. And I remember lobbying for that. And I was so happy to see that happen. The other thing is we spoke out with a solid voice against Trump when he was president. And he made derogatory statements about Latinos. And we were united. Sorry.
Balti, any comments?
I'd like to say, first of all, I'm always in shock and awe to see all of you here. It just seems like a great success. And that's credit to all of you. I can still sit here looking and seeing two tables put together in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and looking at that as La Raza Lawyers Association in real persons. And to see this kind of success is like unimaginable. And that's a credit to all of you. There's a lot of silent heroes that have helped the organization through many years. There's a guy by the name of Dan Sosa, who was a Supreme Court Justice in New Mexico, that lent a lot of credibility and credence to the organization by being a speaker and lobbying. And there's just a lot of silent heroes that have been past presidents of the Hispanic Bar, and a lot of silent heroes that have been local chapter presidents. And a lot of times, both men and women, you have given up a lot of their free time, of their family time in relationship to this voluntary organization. And you deserve a lot of credit for perpetuating it. You know, life's a poorly written novel and there's all kinds of loose ends, but along that line, there's a lot of people that come to bring this together. And you should continue to be proud of yourselves and continue to give yourselves credit because honest arrogance is better than hypocritical humility. And you have to be arrogant about your success, you know, and with Madi at the foundation of it, that deserves a lot of credit.
But let's talk, no. Let's talk a little bit about what we see in the future for them. Where do we think, Balti, you and I had a conversation of where the next frontier is for the Hispanic National Bar Association. It's outside?
Yes, I thought about this with my 35 IQ at its max. And this is what I finally concluded.
It's like my LSAT score.
Yeah. I think that we start having to look at the world in terms of the globe, the earth. And we look at it from El Tierra del Fuego to Barrow, Alaska. And we have organizations in all of those cities. And I'll give you more detail on this tomorrow night.
All right, so that's certainly one challenge. One challenge that I have, and probably the greatest wisdom that I learned from my time in the HNBA leadership is, look, it goes something like, in life, here comes the hands, watch out.
Don't fall out of your chair.
Yeah, in life, you only get very few opportunities for leadership and very few opportunities to step out, lean forward, and do for others by taking risks. But you also have to understand that when you take those risks, things can go wrong, and you have to be willing to accept it and admit it to the people who are coming with you, because you can't leave them behind. But if it goes right, pitando la borinqueña voy. So take advantage of those opportunities. Don't let those go by, because there's other people behind you that need your shoulders to stand on.
Mm.
John, you have a final comment, because I want to get to questions.
No, I just think it's a great organization. I've met a lot of people here. I think the future is bright for this organization.
All right, questions? I'm coming. There's a lot of women past presidents. I'm coming for you. Don't think you're off.
It's on. This is not so much a question as it is a thank you. Thank you so much. This is your legacy. The future is bright because of you all. And Embajadora Aponte, I apologize. Earlier, I was greeting your colleague and I didn't even say hi. I was at CHCI and you invited me to your first swearing in ceremony. Just because I asked. I had never experienced anything like that. And I'm so grateful for you and both of you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, to kind of build on what you were just talking about, the risk and being forthright about that risk, what do you talk about when the people behind you are then scared, don't want to take those risks and kind of act as a weight to you moving forward and moving these ideas forward? Because telling them about the risk is one thing, but them using that risk against you to continue moving forward is another.
One perspective of that, I think it's
Go
okay.
ahead.
One perspective of that is tragedy is not what you suffer, it's what you miss in life. And I think without taking any risks, there's no reward. And we've all had our failures. And I've always thought that success has hundreds of fathers and failure only has one mother. But you have something. And you learn from your mistakes, and none of us are perfect. And when you're my age at 75 years old and you look back on your life, and you talk about por si acaso y repente and maybe, and should I have done this or shouldn't I have done that? People my age don't regret what they did, they regret what they didn't do. And what you don't do is when you don't take any risks.
I have narrowed it down to the following. In life, there are no mistakes, only lessons to be learned. So it doesn't matter how it turns out, you've got to face it, but look at what happened and learn from it. It is a lesson. If you concentrate on the mistake, ay Dios mío, porque Dios is it, it's not gonna work. Take it from me. I mean, the nights that I would worry about, ay, mi casa, Dios mío, si esto no sale bien. El hotel se llevó todo mi chavito. Then I had to remain positive. I always had to look for the right side. And the house that I ended up was even much better than the old house I had in Philadelphia. It always works out. It's a question of how you look at it. And I tell you, positivism is infectious.
Mhm.
But you got to go out there with the enthusiasm. You go, mira, dale, dale, dale. They'll come around. Yo lo llamo anclas, the anchors in my life. Pero sometimes you got to help lift them.
When I was asking people to join the La Raza Law Students or La Raza Lawyers Association, and later Hispanic Lawyers Association, I would use a phone directory and call in the different people that had what I thought were Hispanic names that were lawyers, you know, whether it was in Washington, D.C. or San Francisco, wherever it was. And I would get up Italian names every once in a while. And there's one Italian guy once told me, he says, okay, I'll join the Hispanic bar if you join the Sons of Italy. I said, it's a deal. It's a deal. So I've been a member of the Sons of Italy for a while. But in fairness, he kept his end of the bargain too, you know, because it was hit and miss a lot of times because you're literally going through a phone directory. There was no internet. There was not, and that's what I call the R2D2 things of life that you have to do in order to build up a membership. And it's a lot of work. I call it sweat equity. And all of you have done your fair share of that, I'm sure.
Yes.
I have to say, as president of the Hispanic National Bar Association, I want you to know how meaningful and inspirational it is for me personally to hear from you today. So my question, I want to put you on the spot. What would you like to see us do going forward? What aren't we doing that you really would like to see us as an organization take to the next level?
I'm going to take the privilege of starting because this is something I'm very proud of. The recommendations that we would fight for to give as a serious organization, we're all done around a table like this. John, what do you think? Balti, what do you think of this person? It has turned into a rigorous, very disciplined, and very methodical exercise. And that has been incredible. And the reputation HNBA has in Washington for its recommendation, especially for judges, is outstanding. They never now do anything without asking, what does HNBA think? What is the recommendation of HNBA? I think that you have done well. I would love to see you and I know that you're doing some of this already with the younger people because we can't leave them behind. I have also heard comments such as, well, you're not, or somebody's not Hispanic enough. Óyeme, baby. In my time, if you were Hispanic and you thought you were Hispanic, you were welcome. You no questions asked. If you were willing to join the fight, mostly because there was so much rejection. That has changed tremendously, but it still means that we have to instill in the younger ones that sense of purpose, that goal, that we are all in this together. And even if I still have an accent after, my God, I'm as old as Baltasar Baca. Oh my God. And how long have I been here? I don't even, more than 50 years.
Yes.
And I still have the accent and I can't get rid of it. And my name is, no es muy pronunciable by a lot of people, Mari Carmen, who? It matters.
Have you met John
It
Hurita yet?
Uh-uh.
Have you met John Hurita yet?
No. ese
Although they
John
used to call me
Trapiña.
Johnny Weirdo in
Oh,
school.
well, there you go. There you go. John Huerta is always welcome in my book. He also was a very good dancer. I'm sure he still is.
I
Whoa,
love dancing.
you should, at the conventions, oh, he was the first one out on the floor.
Yes.
But anyway, this all to tell you that we've got to make sure that the young ones are not left out. And I know that you're doing some of the work, but listen, sometimes you got to go as far back as high school and middle school. And that kind of work also needs to be done. We haven't heard anything from our former presidents. Dolores Atencio. I'm going to put you on the spot.
While he's giving the mic to Dolores, I'd like to get to Carlos's question and elaborate on what Mari said. The concept of parity along every single nook and cranny of the legal profession, from the initial coming into an interest in law to the point of the US Supreme Court. That's what you look for the future. Parity, I think, it's easier said than done, and you're working towards it. So give yourself credit for what you're doing, but you need to continue to refine that concept of parity, not just in the boardrooms and not just in corporate America, but in every other avenue of the legal profession throughout the Americas, and doing that with bilingual and bicultural education, both in language and the jargon of the law in Spanish and in English. That's what brings us closer together.
So can you hear me? So at a certain point, the HNBA leadership and sort of the focus shifted from the West Coast to the East Coast. And Mari, I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about the role of the HBA DC and also some of the women like Faye Morales Marks and some of the others that contributed to the growth of the HNBA.
My pride and joy are the two women who came behind me to preside HNBA, one of them Dolores, and the third one, Mary Hernandez. Mary, you're here today, and if not, I caught you.
Yeah.
Yay, Mary. And the reason is because I thought that our community did not look at women in enough leadership positions. Because yes, Vilma Martinez, Graciela Olivares were out there, but they were mega stars. They were, my God, how does a human being achieve all this? There was nobody below them. And I think HNBA offered a vehicle for women to do leadership and to, especially in the area of getting things done. Faye Morales Marks, who presided, God, may she rest in peace, she left us too early, was another one of my mentees who did so well. And she represented an aspect of our community that was rare back then, which was doing securities work in a big law firm. None of us were doing that because we could not compete. The opportunities were not there. But Faye was so brilliant, and Faye opened those doors. And she opened those doors and brought others with her. She brought her husband with her.
Yes.
She brought everybody she could with
She
her.
was a good friend. And one of the other things that I had about Fe Morales, Marx, was and we'd never thought of this, at least I didn't. She created the first newsletter for the Hispanic bar.
Yes.
She created the
Yes.
first, not only for the local bar, but for the national bar.
There was
She's the one
nothing
that
else, so
created it.
the local
there's a
became the newsletter for everybody.
I was really impressed with that.
But the frontier of the law firms, of integrating law firms and insisting that law firms take the Hispanic lawyers seriously, came from those original efforts. Because of course, most of us were so consumed with trying to get the community up and going and making sure that the community was coming with us. Somehow, we did not focus on that. Thank God for people like Faye, who really took that on for all of us and who made sure that she was rebel rousing in a very diplomatic way, because as she once said to me, they'll fire me, they'll kick me out if I make too much trouble. But she really struck that balance. And that is a contribution of women like her. And I'm eternally grateful to both Dolores and Mary, who took on the challenges when they didn't think they could, but I knew that they were going to do well. Leanne, how much time?
Okay.
Anyone with a question?
Good afternoon. Carrie Ritchie, Army General Counsel, longtime, very proud and dedicated member of the HNBA. I'm so happy to hear all of your words of wisdom today. I've been a government attorney for my entire career, military, then career civil servant, now political appointee. But I haven't seen a great growth in government attorneys joining the HNBA. So I wonder if you have any suggestions, words of wisdom to expand that outreach in ways that we can all help in that.
We have to work it. We have to work it. Usually the government attorneys were members of the local HBA of DC. And that's where we found, probably about 80–90% of the government lawyers. And we didn't take it to the next step nationally, which is what I think your point is, and where I think we need to be supportive. And how do you do that? Recruitment, modeling, making sure that government is viewed as an option for service. And there are some very interesting careers in government, especially, well, Balti is a product of the Justice Department.
One of the things that I've always worked hard for in the government, for government attorneys, is that in your evaluations, in the evaluations there should be an evaluation for outreach for lawyers as an incentive for them to recruit more lawyers within the, I guess they're called QSIs or something like that, the quality step increases. In order to do well, you've got to incentivize them a lot in relationship to having a reason to recruit more Hispanics. And I think because of parity and to represent the constituency that they're supposed to be representing. And so you still run into a lot of what called, as you know, bureaucratic pushback on that. But I think if you start getting it as an element within the evaluations of everybody, especially the supervisors, that would help a lot in increasing lawyers. And like Marty said, in Washington, D.C., we've always had that recruitment. And another friend and silent hero, or not so silent sometimes, Percy Duran, who's involved in the very initial stages. he did something that was really profound in Washington, and I'm sure you guys and gals keep this in mind around, is he went to a lot of the embassies and legations that are around in the different parts of the country with Hispanic lawyers that are in their general counsel's office, you know, in embassies or in OAS, and you can get some of those people and recruit them and bring them into the fold too. And sometimes, you know, you incentivize them because that creates a networking system, which you already have. You have a lot more to offer than we did. I said, look, we just got to get together. It's in our best interest, you know, and we didn't have an interest structure at that time. And part of it was a force of personality, a lot like Mari Carmen, you know, just urging you on to keep trying. And I think those are the factors.
And Carrie, thank you for your service. You have been around and active in both local and national. Thank you.
Bob, Mari Carmen, John, Jaime Rizaga, former vice president of the HNBA, former president of HBA DC. First of all, thank you for doing this on our 50th anniversary. You are indeed treasures of our community. I am personally very grateful for the mentorship and the leadership that you have done to me and to so many. By the way, Mari Carmen is a hero of Puerto Rico. She's a hero of Washington, DC. What she's done for the community in Washington, DC.
She's a heroine.
And I'm going to take this opportunity because she knows how much I admire her, but I've never done so. I've never expressed my admiration and gratefulness in public. What she's done for the Salvadorian community. When the Salvadoreños came to Washington in the 1970s, Mari Carmen was like a madrina to that community, and that's how they respect her. I had the honor of working with the HNBA team that helped her get over the Senate confirmation, which she was nominated to be ambassador to El Salvador. And that was a very long process, but I had then the pleasure of visiting her in El Salvador. And as she was taking me to the airport to leave El Salvador, she walked in front of me and two 18-year-old Salvadorians came by and one hit on the other one on the side and says, and I was behind her, so they didn't see me, but I'm looking at them as she's walking away. One knocks the other one on the side and points at Mari Carmen, and I'm a military guy, as you guys can see, but that young Salvadorian did like this to Mari Carmen from the back and kept walking. That's the kind of ambassador, that's the kind of leader, that's the kind of mentor, that's the kind of treasure that we have. So thank you so much, Mari Carmen, for your great leadership.
You're very kind, Jaime.
And she was not only the first woman president of the HNBA, she was also the first woman president of the HBADC. So, so we're very grateful for her pioneer there. But I'll say this, when I would come to this conference 15 years ago, one of the goals that this organization had was to make sure that a Latino or a Latina would make it to the Supreme Court. And we've had this conversation, and I know we all are very proud of that, but it's gone by. But I think for the new generations that might take that for granted, because they have had now Sonia Sotomayor for over 10 years in the Supreme Court, but it was a big, big initiative of this organization, and it has happened. What, you know, from where you sit, and when you got together, whether it was in San Antonio, in Denver, or in LA, getting 20 of you together, did you ever think that would happen? And what can you say that achievement for this organization indirectly and for our community has meant as we speak to the younger generations?
Well,
Muchas gracias.
And thank you for the question, Jaime. But one way I have of answering that is back in 1984, when I was president, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus was in the infancy of its annual dinners.
Yeah.
And Walter Mondale, who was then running for president against Reagan and got, my goodness, swapped. But I didn't care. Everybody was in line to say hello. I would not give up. I persevered. And when I got to him, I said, my name is Mari Carmen Aponte. I'm president of HNBA. And whatever you do, you must name a Hispanic to the Supreme Court. This was 1984. And everybody's like, she must be crazy. She uses her she uses her one chance to say anything to a potential president on the Supreme Court. Anyway, I also have another comment on this, and that is back in 1980, when I finished my White House fellowship, I got a call from a woman named Sonia Sotomayor, who was on the board of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Fund. And she wanted to know whether I would be interested in joining Pearl Deaf Board. And I said, is the Pope Catholic? But that's, this was like dying and going to heaven.
Yeah.
And she was still ADA in Morgenthal's district attorney's office in New York. And we sparked a friendship that has lasted all these years. And it came from that dedication to the community. So you don't know who's with you, holding hands as you fight the fight for the community. That's why I think it's important. We have to do it all. What we did then was what we had to do back in the 80s, and do the community and dedicate all we had to fighting for the community. Fortunately, that has changed. It hasn't changed enough, but it has changed. And now we can fight a number of fronts at the same time. A luxury we did not have.
Yeah.
That's your luxury. That's how you carry us forward. But don't forget who is sitting beside you, because they may sit in the US Supreme Court today.
Yeah. In 1993, the San Francisco Hispanic National Bar Convention, I was on the dais with then U.S. District Court Judge Sonia Sotomayor, and she was trying to encourage to become a U.S. District Court judge, or at least to apply, go through the process. And I told her that I didn't really want to be a referee. I wanted it to be a litigator, and I am a litigator, and I'm a trial attorney. And I said, that's what I can't, for lack of a better vision for myself professionally, I always thought of and wanted to be and dreamt of being a trial attorney. And to this day, I have no regrets. But I said, why do you want to be a judge? And why are you a judge? She looked at me in a little quiet manner.
Are you crazy?
And she said, that's the most powerful person in the room when you're a lawyer. And I thought that was a very simple statement, but it's very profound. And what you have to recognize is in relationship to your careers and in relationship to your vision of yourself in your career and the people that come after you, what do you envision for yourself? We saw things very, and I'm very, very proud of her. And you have to recognize now that soon to be, hopefully, Justice Jackson comes to the Supreme Court, that Sonia Sotomayor, I'm sure, is going to be a good mentor to her and has 10 years of experience that she will share with soon to be Justice Jackson. But that's where the women of the HNBA deserve the credit that 10 years earlier, they had a Hispanic woman on the US Supreme Court. And I could have, getting to your point, I could have never dreamt that. I was hoping for maybe 50 in the room instead of just 20 for the next HNBA convention, and it's just unfathomable. And we got to give ourselves credit while at the same time, we've got to push ourselves forward.
Our time has come to a close, but as we come to a close, I'll give you one more anecdote with Sonia when we were at the board of Pearl Deaf. And we used to talk about who, if any, would be the first Hispanic in the US Supreme Court. And both of us were convinced it would not happen in our lifetime. So that's HNBA, you get it all.
Dream big, dream big.
Wait, I've got,
Oh,
I've got two things I want to say.
do we have time? John wants to close with, okay, go ahead, John.
There are just two things I want to say. One, I'd ask you to help support the new National Museum of the American Latino, which after many years of lobbying for it, finally becoming a reality. The second thing, it sounds like I'm perfect, but if my wife was here, she'd let you speak for an hour, informing you that I'm not. That's it.
Okay, all right. Thank you, John.
Hi, everybody. I have to, since, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for being here. It is so meaningful to hear from people that went through such a struggle to get us here. And I hope that we can do you proud going forward.